They told me I wasn't welcome at my own grandfather's funeral. Not because I had done anything wrong. Not because I had betrayed the family. But because, according to them, I was the disappointment who never became successful enough to deserve a seat in the front row. My uncle quietly handed me a folding chair and pointed toward the back corner of the cemetery. My cousins walked past, pretending they didn't know me. My aunt even whispered that Grandpa would be ashamed if people thought I was related to them. So I stayed silent. I stood alone while everyone else fought to look like the grieving heir. They cried loud enough for strangers to hear. They hugged each other for the cameras. They praised a man they barely visited while he was alive. No one noticed the elderly lawyer waiting beside the casket. No one noticed the sealed envelope hidden beneath Grandpa's favorite Bible. And no one expected what happened after the minister finished the final prayer. Because the lawyer cleared his throat, looked directly at me and said, "Mr. Ethan Walker, your grandfather instructed that this letter be read only after every member of the family is present, especially you." In that instant, every head turned. The people who had pushed me into the shadows suddenly realized. The funeral wasn't really about saying goodbye. It was about revealing the one secret Grandpa had hidden from all of them. And before the sun set that evening, everything they believed about our family would fall apart forever. The rain had started before sunrise. By the time I arrived at St. Matthew Cemetery, the gravel paths were soaked and rows of black umbrellas stretched across the hillside like silent crows waiting for something to happen. I parked my 15-year-old pickup truck at the far end of the lot. It looked embarrassingly out of place beside the polished German sedans and luxury SUVs lined up near the chapel. I could already imagine what my relatives would say. They never missed an opportunity. As I stepped out wearing my only black suit, I heard my cousin Brandon laugh before I even reached the gate. "Look who actually showed up." His wife glanced at my truck and smirked. I thought he'd at least borrow a nicer car for Grandpa's funeral. I ignored them. I wasn't here for them. I was here for the man who had quietly raised me after my parents died in a highway accident when I was 12. Grandpa Henry never cared how much money anyone made. He cared whether they kept their promises. And I had promised him one thing. No matter what happened, I would attend his funeral. Inside the chapel, polished mahogany surrounded the closed casket. White lilies covered every corner. Photographs from Grandpa's life stood on easels. One showed him serving overseas. Another captured him teaching neighborhood children how to fish. The last one made me smile. He was sitting on the porch with me when I was 16, holding 2 melted ice cream cones because we had forgotten to eat them while arguing about baseball. Then my Aunt Rebecca walked over. Her perfume reached me before her words did. "Ethan." She forced a smile. "We've already assigned seating." She handed me a small printed card. Row 11, seat 8, the very last row. Directly beside the maintenance door, I looked toward the front. Every uncle, aunt, and cousin had reserved seats with engraved nameplates. Even relatives who hadn't visited Grandpa in years sat near the casket. I nodded. "That's fine." She seemed almost disappointed that I didn't argue. "Good," she replied. "We want everything to look respectable." Respectable. The word lingered in my mind. To Rebecca, respectable meant expensive watches, designer handbags, and social status. It certainly didn't mean the grandson who spent every Saturday driving to the nursing home. Because nobody knew. Grandpa insisted we keep it private. For kindness, he always told me, loses its meaning once it becomes performance. So for 5 years, every weekend, I visited. Sometimes we played chess. Sometimes we watched old Western movies. Sometimes we simply sat together without speaking. When dementia began stealing pieces of his memory, there were days he forgot my birthday. Once he even forgot my name. But every single time I stood to leave, he squeezed my hand and whispered the same sentence. "You kept your promise." No one else knew those visits happened. Not my uncles, not my cousins, certainly not Aunt Rebecca. They only arrived on holidays when cameras were around. The funeral service began. The minister spoke gently about honor and family. Then relatives took turns sharing memories. Brandon claimed Grandpa inspired his career. Another cousin insisted she inherited Grandpa's generosity. My Uncle David wiped fake tears while describing himself as Henry's closest confidant. I sat quietly, because I knew the truth. Grandpa used to wait by the nursing home window every Sunday afternoon. And whenever another weekend passed without visitors, he would simply smile and say, "They must be busy." He never complained. Not once. Halfway through the ceremony, I noticed an elderly man in a gray suit standing near the back wall. He carried a leather briefcase worn smooth by decades of use. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't crying. He was watching, carefully. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. Something about him felt strangely familiar. After the final hymn, people gathered outside while workers prepared for the burial. Clusters of relatives discussed inheritances before Grandpa had even been lowered into the ground. I overheard Brandon whisper, "The lake house alone has to be worth $2 million." His sister replied, "And the investment portfolio?" Dad says there's probably another 5. They weren't mourning. They were calculating. As I walked toward the cemetery hill alone, someone called my name. "Mr. Walker." I turned. The elderly man approached slowly. He extended his hand. "My name is Charles Morrison." Recognition hit instantly. Grandpa had mentioned him dozens of times. His attorney. Charles opened his briefcase. Inside rested a thick cream-colored envelope sealed dark blue wax. Across the front, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words, "To be opened after my burial." Charles lowered his voice. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions." Before I could answer, Aunt Rebecca marched toward us. Her expression tightened. "What's going on?" Charles remained perfectly calm. "I'll explain shortly." She looked from him to me, then scoffed. "I hope this isn't another sentimental letter." Charles simply smiled. "No, Mom. It's considerably more important than that." Rebecca's confidence faltered. Within minutes, every family member gathered around the gravesite. Rain dripped from umbrellas, mud-soaked expensive shoes. The casket rested above the open earth. The minister finished the final prayer. Silence settled across the cemetery. Charles stepped forward, removed the envelope, broke the wax seals, looked directly at me, and spoke the words that froze every conversation. Mr. Henry Walker requested that his final declaration be read publicly, only after every member of his family was present. Then he unfolded the first page, took a slow breath, and began reading. Charles Morrison adjusted his glasses and slowly looked around at the faces gathered beside the freshly dug grave. Then he unfolded the letter. "If you are hearing these words, it means I have already left this world. I am not afraid of death. What saddens me most is watching my family slowly forget the true meaning of love." The entire cemetery fell silent. Only the sound of rain tapping against black umbrellas remained. Charles continued reading. "Many of you believe you truly knew me. But the truth is, during the last 5 years of my life, only one person kept the promise to visit me every single week." People began exchanging confused glances. Brandon leaned toward his father and whispered, "It's probably Dad." Charles shook his head and continued, "That person never bragged about taking care of me. Never posted a single photo online. Never once asked how much money I planned to leave behind." He raised his eyes. They settled directly on me. "That person is my grandson, Ethan Walker." The entire cemetery froze. My Aunt Rebecca gasped. "That's impossible." Uncle David shook his head over and over. "There has to be some mistake." Without saying a word, Charles reached into his old leather briefcase and pulled out another folder. "This is the official visitor log from the nursing home." He flipped through the pages. Week after week, month after month, year after year, the same signature appeared. Ethan Walker. Not a single week was missed in 5 years. Then Charles produced another stack of documents. "These are the payment records covering Mr. Henry Walker's medical and nursing expenses during the final 3 years of his life." The payer's name appeared on every invoice, Ethan Walker. This time, no one said a word. Brandon stared at me in disbelief. "But how could you possibly afford all of this?" I remained silent. Charles offered a faint smile. "That," he said, "is exactly what Mr. Henry wanted all of you to discover today." He opened the final page of the will. His voice echoed clearly through the rain. "I leave to Ethan the Walker family farm, the lakeside property, and 62% of the shares in our family company." A collective gasp swept across the mourners. Aunt Rebecca nearly shouted. "This isn't fair!" Charles calmly continued reading. "Some of you will call this unfair. But wealth is not a reward for bloodlines. It is a reward for loyalty." He paused for a moment before reading the next sentence. "Furthermore, Ethan legally became a co-owner of these assets 3 years ago. I instructed my attorney to keep this information confidential until the day of my funeral." Brandon spun toward me. "You knew?" I nodded. "Yes." "Then why didn't you tell anyone?" I lowered my eyes toward Grandpa's casket covered in white flowers. My voice remained steady. "Grandpa always said that if family only exists after people discover you have money, then it was never truly family to begin with." No one had an answer. The rain fell harder. Charles closed the folder. "There is one final instruction," he resumed reading. "Whether Ethan chooses to sell everything or keep everything is entirely his decision. No member of this family may pressure him or challenge these arrangements. Every provision has been legally notarized and fully enforceable. Uncle David slowly stepped forward. For the first time in years, he looked at me without arrogance. Ethan, I'm sorry. Moments later, Aunt Rebecca walked over as tears streamed down her face. I never knew you kept visiting, Dad. I was wrong. Then Brandon approached. Then my other cousins. One by one, they apologized. Some even reached out as if hoping for a hug. But inside me, there was no sense of victory, no satisfaction, only a quiet emptiness. I looked toward Grandpa's grave. I remembered the afternoons we spent fishing by the lake. I remembered the times he quietly split the last cookie in the package with me. And above all, I remembered the sentence he repeated throughout my childhood. One day everyone leaves this world. The only thing that remains is how they are remembered. Charles gently placed a hand on my shoulder. There's one more gift your grandfather left for you. From his briefcase, he removed an old leather journal. It wasn't filled with deeds or financial records. Instead, it contained more than 100 handwritten letters. The first envelope read, "For Ethan, open when you feel lonely." The second, "Open when you fail." The third, "Open when you begin to doubt yourself." I chose one at random. Inside, Grandpa's familiar handwriting covered the page. If your family ever hurts you, remember this. Forgiving them does not mean allowing them to hurt you again. Forgiveness simply frees your own heart. I folded the letter carefully. My eyes burned with tears. After the funeral, I decided not to sell the family farm. Instead, I transformed it into a free community center for senior citizens in our town. The reading room was named after Grandpa Henry. The old wooden bench where he loved to sit remained exactly where it had always been. Every weekend, elderly neighbors gathered there to drink tea, play chess, and share stories. No one would have to experience the loneliness Grandpa quietly endured. Over the following months, my family tried many times to reconnect. They invited me to dinners, family reunions, even business partnerships. I was always polite. But I never forgot the lesson I learned that rainy afternoon. Trust. Once it has been buried alongside someone you love, is incredibly difficult to recover. 1 year later, on Grandpa's first memorial anniversary, I returned to the cemetery. I placed a bouquet of sunflowers, his favorite flowers, in front of his headstone. There were no crowds, no cameras, no carefully rehearsed speeches. Just me and the silence. I smiled softly and whispered, "I kept my promise, Grandpa." A gentle breeze drifted through the trees. The leaves rustled quietly, almost sounding like his familiar laugh. For the first time since the day he died, I no longer felt pain, only gratitude. Because the greatest inheritance Grandpa ever left me wasn't the land. It wasn't the company shares. It wasn't the money. It was my self-respect, the confidence to never again feel the need to prove my worth to people who had never truly been willing to see it. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Grandpa Henry's passing, I stood alone in front of his headstone beneath a bright blue sky. I carried a bouquet of sunflowers, his favorite flowers, and carefully placed them at the base of the memorial. There were no reporters, no expensive suits, no fake tears, no speeches designed for an audience. Just me. For a long moment, I stared at his name carved into the stone. Then I smiled and whispered, "I kept my promise, Grandpa." A gentle breeze moved through the trees, making the leaves rustle softly overhead. For just a second, it almost sounded like his familiar laugh. And for the first time since the funeral, the pain was gone. What remained wasn't grief. It was gratitude. Because the greatest gift my grandfather ever gave me wasn't the land, the company's shares, or the inheritance everyone fought over. It was the confidence to know that my worth never depended on other people's opinions. It depended on the promises I chose to keep. My family eventually reached out. Some apologized sincerely. Some wanted another chance. Others simply wanted access to the fortune they had ignored until it belonged to someone else. I wished them well, but I never forgot the lesson Grandpa had spent his life teaching me. The people who only value you after discovering your success never truly valued you at all. And sometimes, the richest inheritance you can receive isn't money. It's the courage to walk away from those who only recognize your importance when it benefits them. Before you go, have you ever been underestimated by your own family or by people who should have believed in you the most? Did someone only start respecting you after they discovered your success? Share your story in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and your experience might inspire someone else who's silently going through the same thing. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next unforgettable story. And remember, never let someone else decide your value. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is carrying the strongest heart of all.